Thousands of migrants dying as they try to reach Europe. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Over the last several years, thousands of migrants have drowned in the Mediterranean Sea as they try to make their way to European countries like Italy and Greece. One of the deadliest tragedies happened recently after an overloaded boat capsized and sank off the Greek coast. It resulted in dozens of confirmed deaths and hundreds more missing. The boat had sailed from Libya, packed with migrants from countries in North Africa, Syria and Pakistan. The latest disaster has also focused attention on the tough stance Europe has taken on border security as it responds to the ongoing crisis. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Maria Alcazar Castilla. She is Deputy Regional Director for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in Europe. With us from Athens is Dimitrios Soltogiannis. He is a journalist and correspondent for Star TV Greece. With us from Germany is Klaus Laris. He is a visiting scholar at the Center for European Studies at Harvard University. And also joining us is Abdullahi Boru Alake. He is an Africa security and policy analyst. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Maria, let me start with you. Let's start with that tragedy off the coast of Greece. Dozens of people killed, hundreds more missing. What's the latest on that?
Well, as you said, only 80 people have survived, 20 of them being children. Some dozens corpses have been found, but hundreds are missing, and probably we will never know exactly what has been the death toll of this tragedy. With volunteers of Hellenic Red Cross of the Kalamata region that they were attending, the survivors told us is that besides the medical conditions, the relief people needed, what they reported is having lived a horror when trying to reach safety in Europe.
Maria, this is just one of many tragedies that we have seen in the Mediterranean. Thousands of people have died trying to make that crossing into Europe. What is your assessment of the overall immigrant crisis?
That this type of tragedies should be prevented. And the worrying thing is that it's not getting better, it's getting worse. The first quarter of 2023 has been the deadliest in the last 5 years in the Mediterranean. I mean, all Mediterranean routes are active, the eastern, the central, and also the western one, trying to reach Spain or Portugal, but the central Mediterranean one is often the deadliest. According to the International Organization for Migration, just in the first months of 2023, 800 people have lost their lives. And probably the figure is much higher because many shipwrecks went unnoticed, or the real figures of people in the boats and that drown while looking for safety are not known. So for us, it's of vital importance that safe pathways are created and that search and rescue operations are facilitated.
Dimitrios, the Greek Coast Guard has released pictures of this overloaded boat before it sank, before it capsized and sank. We understand it sailed from Libya. What can you tell us about those who were on board this vessel and how Greece is responding to criticism that it did not act quickly enough to save lives?
Good evening, Anand from Athens, Greece. Thank you for having me on the show. Well, listen, Greece is the gateway to Europe. Obviously, a lot of smugglers are using Greece as the gateway to Europe, trying to get all these people to, like you said, to other countries like Italy, to Western Europe. The truth is that the Greek Navy is claiming that there was nothing they could do simply because in international law, they have to ask for help. The captain of the boat never really asked for help. So since the boat was traveling in international waters, there is so much Greece could do. But I will bring up the broader problem here, which is the EU policy. Greece is only one country member of the European Union. Greece, there's only so much the new elected government, because we had elections this past weekend, that can do. In my opinion, I think Brussels should act, and we should look at this problem as a broader European issue rather than a Greek issue.
Right, and Demetrios, what kind of monitoring is there in the seas off Greece? Of course, Greece is made up of islands, and I would imagine that the Greek Navy is constantly patrolling those areas.
Absolutely, just like you would do in the U.S. In the border of the United States, the Greeks are patrolling the waters. They are patrolling the water borders because the sea does have borders. And the truth is that these laws and these checks are becoming stricter and stricter by the minute. But again, the volume of people coming in is great, and I think without the help of Brussels, of the European Union, there's only so much you can do. Obviously, as you know, Greece has been criticized in the past in regards to pushbacks. Many governments have been criticized in regards to pushbacks, but again, there's only so much they can actually do when you are thinking about the volume of people coming in. We're talking about thousands and thousands of people.
Right. Abdullahi, many of those trying to reach Europe are coming through ports in North Africa. What is driving this migration surge?
Thank you so much. I think we need to step back a little bit and just look at the bigger picture. The idea that Europe is being invaded is an idea that is not being supported by empirical evidence. If you look at the number of people who are being hosted as refugees in many of the African countries, majority of them are hosted by African countries. If you ask many of them, many do want to stay in the region. They don't want to go to Europe. They don't want to go to, Western countries. That's number one. Number two, I think we need to break down this issue also into various points. Number one, I think the Europeans' fortress model, where the European Union is very much willing to prevent people coming into their shores, number one, and as a result, they do not want to be taken to account because of that. And because of that, what happens is that people who are, not benign actors, malignant actors, take advantage of that. And that is why we are having, people smugglers. But in terms of the push and the pull factors, it's really a problem of serious economic challenges. And the reality is those challenges are going to compound, because of COVID that we've had, and a lot of those countries are drowning in debt that are due to be paid soon. Most of them will move on. And so for Europe, I think they really need to think this through. Just give an example before I hand it over. Sudan is going through a crisis. Majority of people, at least 500,000 according to UNHCR, have moved on, most of them to Egypt and some of them to South Sudan. The EU chief was in Cairo last week, and he gave Cairo more money for border control. So it's at the heart of it is more people do not want to come over, and the fortress model is a cruel model, and it will not prevent people from moving to Europe. So just dark side.
Abdullahi, just briefly, if you can, if you, as you say, most of those seeking refuge want to stay in African countries and not make that very dangerous crossing across the Mediterranean to Western Europe, I mean, how does that explain that thousands of people are, in fact, making that trip?
They are not, compared to the number of people who are staying on the, let me just give an example. Sudan, until the conflict, hosts 1.1 million refugees registered. Kenya hosts almost 700,000 refugees. Ethiopia hosts almost 900,000 refugees. Uganda hosts almost 2 million refugees. Refugees are not going to the shores. If you look at a percentage of people who are being displaced, they are not coming to Europe. Look at the number of people that Turkey is hosting. So the idea that there is an invasion of Europe, the idea that there is an invasion of Western countries by migrants from elsewhere, compared to the number of people who are being displaced, is incredibly limited. Furthermore, because of climate change, more people are going to be displaced. And the fortress model is not going to help that.
Klaus Lara, it's great to see you. It's been a long time. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, has been working with other European countries like Italy. Of course, these are the countries that are directly impacted by the migrant deaths in the Mediterranean. Let's listen to what Emmanuel Macron said recently.
En matière migratoire ensuite.
In terms of migration, we continue to experience tragedies in the Mediterranean. We need to be able to organize asylum and immigration in Europe more effectively while remaining true to our values. And here too, I want to say that the coordination and good work between our two countries must continue. We want to work better with countries of origin and transit to prevent influxes. This is the policy we have been trying to implement for 6 years.
So, Klaus, as we are aware, Europe has been criticized over its migration policies. I mean, how much blame should there be on countries like, Greece, France, Germany, Italy, for that matter? And what does one make of the fact? I mean, Dimitrios brought this up earlier, that there is an absence of a coherent, cohesive policy.
This is perfectly fine and correct. The migration and asylum policy of the European Union and the individual European countries is not a policy of success. Since 2016, the EU countries and the EU have been bickering about how to deal with an increasing number of migrants to Europe. Of course, there is not an invasion from Africa or other continents, but some politicians in European countries such as Hungary and Poland talk up such an invasion, and their population or some of their populations are respective and responsive to that kind of sloganeering. Something needs to be done, and what has been done recently on the 8th of June of this year is that there was a summit in Luxembourg where a radical breakthrough was sort of achieved, at least when we compare it to the policy of the EU previously. And this new policy is supposed to make it more coherent among the European countries how they deal with migrants from outside Europe. And there will be a cap on numbers they are obliged to take, so a quota will have been introduced, and if countries don't wish to observe that quota, they will have to pay up to 20,000 euro per head of migrants who come into Europe. And that is, of course, painful and will provide a budget for the European Union to deal with migration issue. Shortly after that summit, Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, went to Tunisia and offered 1 billion euros to the Tunisian government if it kept its borders closed, if it prevented migrants from reaching the European Union. And this is a continuation of the policy of the past, because a similar deal had been struck with Turkey a few years ago. So that encourages countries not to let migrants come to Europe, but keep them in their own borders. What it totally ignores is, of course, the fate of the individual migrants. Because whether these migrants have a future in Tunisia and Turkey is very questionable. And also their treatment in these countries, and as well as at border stations in the EU, is also very questionable. So the EU policy needs to be severely criticized. They are trying, but at the moment, the difficulties of integrating migrants into Europe is still facing severe problems, not least because there are almost 4 million Ukrainian refugees in Europe, and they need to be dealt with as well. And a lot of countries feel that they are overburdened by migrants from outside Europe. This may objectively not be correct, but subjectively, that is the general feeling which is espoused by politicians in a great many European countries.
Abdullahi, what do you make of these plans or these proposals that are being presented by the European Union to counter this crisis? For instance, like giving money to a country like Tunisia to keep refugees within its borders, whereas the problem, as you've pointed out, lies within their home countries, where countries are faced with enormous debt, where they're faced with economic crises. How does it help to keep people? You're just putting people in another confining people to another country, aren't you?
Yeah, let's just step back and look at Tunisia. Tunisia, this is a president who just a few years ago disregarded the constitution, and he sounded a death knell to what was a really progressive reform in that country. And as a result, EU will talk about human rights on one hand and be willing to deal with Tunisia. Italian president was in Libya a few months ago. What did she do? She gave more money to the Libyan coast guards to prevent people moving over. EU president was in Egypt the other day. And let me just also mention that what we have as a conflict in Sudan, one of the main parties, that is RSF, before that Janjaweed, before that border controls, was funded by EU. So the reality is EU needs to talk human rights throughout. It has to be consistent. And secondly, the idea of externalizing, the idea of securitizing border response to countries that have got questionable human rights record doesn't necessarily prevent people from coming into the European borders. People will come, and more will come, and this will only lead to more problems.
Maria, we've seen these video of these rusty boats which bring people across the Mediterranean. There are lots of women, lots of children on board these boats. I mean, how terrifying are these trips, and what kind of psychological impact do these tragedies, like we've seen off the coast of Greece, have on people who survive?
The travel in the sea is extremely dangerous, but we also have to take into account what their previous journeys have been, that sometimes might have been months or even years in very hardship conditions. Just to give an example, yesterday the team was talking to Sara Mancinelli, which is the operations manager of the Ocean Viking and a search and rescue operation that IFRC is managing together with SOS Mediterranean. And while we were talking with her, the call was interrupted because of the instability on the boat. And that's a large, safe boat, a vessel that is prepared to the sea. The water was relatively calm yesterday and the weather, but it still is open sea. If we imagine that the tiny boats in which migrants try to cross the sea, made of wood or rubber, that are usually overcrowded, people sitting in the edges without life jackets, with sometimes engines in very poor conditions that leak fuel into the boat, and people knowing that if they fall, probably no one will see or hear them again, or maybe they even see how others fall and they are not able to assist them. So what volunteers in all the Mediterranean Sea, from Greece, Cyprus, Italy, and Spain tell us is that people, when they arrive, they need medical attention. They are often dehydrated. And many times also they faint, or they are in a very weak condition because they have not had access to proper food in a long term. Depending on the season, they might have sunstroke or suffer hypothermia. You add to that, sometimes they have burns because of the leaks of the fuel. And the word that might summarize it better is that they are exhausted. They are exhausted of the very long and dangerous journey they've done, and of the danger in the sea, and they need psychosocial support that sometimes might be needed for a long period of time, and yet still they will face the uncertainty of what will happen to them once they have reached the shore. But to add, we have to add that when there are shipwrecks, there are hundreds of people that do not know what has happened to a beloved one, and they are not able to do proper mourning or closure. So that adds to the psychosocial and trauma effects people face.
Dimitrios, you were talking a moment ago about part of the problem being that there is a lack of a Europe-wide proper policy in place to deal with this kind of migration. What do you make of the measures that are being discussed right now?
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick that the problem, again, last week in New York, I had the chance to ask the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, about this. And he said, again, even from a UN standpoint, that the problem is European, and the problem is not necessarily where the incident happened, is not Greek, it's not Italian, it's basically Brussels. The truth is, you will always have people coming in, and I just want to say, comment on what I heard before, only because the smugglers are taking advantage of human pain. And according to my information, these smugglers are charging a pretty good dollar for the services they're providing. I mean, we have information coming in that they charge close to 5,000 euros per head, promising these people a better future. So it's not necessarily a matter of all these incentives, giving out money for people to stay there, but you have all these smugglers who are going out to people saying, I can promise you a better future, pay me, and I will make the trip across. I will help you make that dangerous trip across. So again and again, we have to see it as a whole, and I don't think we're getting any better with the discussion when we're suggesting, giving money incentives for people to stay and not make the trip.
Yeah, well, there has been, on the Greek tragedy, there has been a response from the Greek government. Here is the country's immigration minister. Let's listen.
People that were saved, their lives were saved, they are there. We treat them. But the problem is that we're in front again of a disaster in the sea. And what we believe, and Greece has done everything possible on this, is to crack down all these people that go with ships that cannot be in the sea, take people, take money, and bring them to Europe. European Union must work harder on this field. We cannot afford any more losing lives in the sea.
So, Dimitrios, that's what the Greek minister says there. But there has been criticism, we've seen that in the media, of what's been termed pushbacks by the Greek Navy of these vessels.
Exactly, which is what I mentioned a minute ago. Well, the minute these people make it to your soil, you have to process them. We saw a huge effort unfolding by the Greek Navy, the Greek police, all the hospitals in the region of Kalamata trying to take these people in, but eventually these people will have to be processed. Once they're back on their feet standing, healthy and well, they either have to make it to their final destination or unfortunately, Greece doesn't have the resources, to keep them there. And let's just also remind you that Greece is a country that recently came out of a major economic crisis, major austerity measures, so this makes it even harder. I'm not saying that if it was any other member of the European Union, it would have been easier, but again, the Greek government has a hot potato, so to speak, in their hands with what's going to happen with all these people. And again, this is a European policy. This is not a Greek policy. That's at stake here.
Abdullahi, as we noted earlier on, that a lot of these boats leave from Libya, and this was a country that was virtually destroyed by NATO, led by the United States and its European allies. Libya is now effectively a failed state, isn't it? So is what we're seeing partly a result of that?
It is in a major part because, if a country is not stable, it's very easy for malign actors to be able to set up a shop there and be able to traffic some of these folks. But the idea that, absent of a stable administration, Italian Prime Minister feels that it is okay to come and, work with that kind of administration just shows that the length to which some of the European countries go to ensure that people do not come to their shores. I think it is about time the European Union realized that this policy of externalizing and securitizing response to migration is not going to solve the problem, the better for everyone involved.
Yeah. Klaus, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he's been talking about the migrant crisis and refugees. Let's listen to what he had to say.
That many asylum seekers turn up in Germany, even though it has no external borders, is also clear. We have taken in about 1 million refugees from Ukraine, which is currently the most in Europe, and we have a further 240,000 refugees who have sought asylum in Germany.
Klaus, there has been criticism that Germany and other European countries have been doing more to accommodate Ukrainian refugees rather than those coming from the Middle East or Syria or from North Africa. I mean, is that fair criticism? Is there racism at work here?
I don't know whether there's racism at work, but it clearly is true that Ukrainian refugees have obtained more and greater support than migrants from outside Europe. Perhaps the crisis in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, is more clear to see for everyone. So the urgency seems to be more direct. While refugees, who travel in individual groups, who are not that observable for the general public in many European countries, don't simply get that attention and that sympathy from many people, including politicians. And I think we see a severe crisis in Europe. What we see is that a lack of effort to actually help people at sea. Greece is one of the culprits here, but also Italy, many other countries, and individual ship captains who simply do not want to see capsized people and help them along the shore, because it causes an awful lot of bureaucracy and bureaucratic problems afterwards. But then, of course, European countries do not want to see more migrants from outside Europe. This may be a racist problem, it may be an economic crisis, but it certainly is a severe problem which needs to be tackled. And of course, there also is a domestic pressure. The voter doesn't support politicians who support migrants.
Right, and that is a point, Dimitrios, that we've not discussed yet, and that is the politics of all of this. I mean, if you take Greece, we've seen some Greeks rally in support of the migrants. I mean, Greece took more than 1 million migrants. They entered the country during the refugee crisis of 2015, 2016. Greece just had an election. I mean, what is the political mood on this issue in the country?
Yeah, it's not about whether we want migrants or whether Greece or the Greek government wants migrants. It's a question of whether it's sustainable to take care of everybody. I mean, clearly, you cannot take care of everybody. You have a certain budget. You have a certain policy in place. So now the new elected government certainly does support taking in people and taking in refugees. I mean, similar to I would say the policy is similar to the United States. If you can prove to the Greek government that, you will have a better future here and you had to leave your country and it's dangerous to go back, we'll take you in. But it's just a matter of how many people can we afford to keep? Yeah. And again, the funding comes majorly from the European Union, not necessarily from the Greek state. So we have to ask our European allies and partners, where do they stand on this?
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. You have been watching another edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.